few minutes to go. Waiting for the.
For you to start digging.
I have quite had time to read it yet. Yeah.
We got interviews and documents.
Now call the meeting to order, if we could. As soon as I figure, for the March 28, 2016 work session of the Wicomico County Council. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. What we're going to do today is, first item on the agenda to discuss is the poultry house standards in reference to trying to draft some type of legislation for the poultry industry as far as the houses, the new mega farms, as they call them, that are being introduced to the eastern shore of Wicomico County in particular. I know we have Mr. Jack Lennox here today. Jack, if you would like to help us, we'd appreciate it. We know you've done a lot of work, Mr. Strasburg. Jack, I know you were spending part of your Easter weekend on this, and we appreciate all the time.
Sure, it's important, Mr. Cannon. Thank you.
What the council has is this discussion draft titled 32816. I guess we'll go through that one step at a time.
Sure. All said. Thank you, Mr. Cannon. The draft that you have before you is meant to address the points of agreement, and I guess I say that with a question mark, from your last work session, reviewing my notes as well as the very complete notes put together by Ms. Hurley. So that was excellent to refer to in terms of the individual council concerns, comments, some questions that were left for us to discuss, and trying to make sure in this draft that we include those, and of course we're open to others as the discussion proceeds. It comes in three parts. It's the draft form of points that we initiated several meetings ago. Attached to that by reference would be the intended buffer requirements. And then for the first time, I've included for you the direct excerpt out of the existing zoning code about special exceptions. And that's important to point out because as we discuss criteria, it's good for you to see that list because the Board of Appeals, if you choose to involve them in this, again, I've pointed out a couple times, it's not who shows up that day or just a count of who's in favor, who's opposed. They have to make findings, and they have to find that a proponent has met certain standards. Those are and so what I've included are the standards that are in your code right now for all special exceptions. You can add to that list if you would like to have additional findings, but those are the basic ones. So, I'm not sure. Mr. Cannon, is the sound okay?
And no one's complaining yet.
I think
Light's not on.
Keith, we're okay. Okay,
we're good. Okay, I'll try to project certainly for the audience.
okay.
The handout initially then going to the poultry standards dated March 28th. The first item and what's included in bold is the ones that are points that have been modified or added to since last time. We discussed that any standards regarding bulk, those are setbacks, separations. We've included language that said code should include in conjunction with any specified setback or buffer requirements. Said requirements may be modified by special exception by the Board of Appeals. Such special exception requires consistency with the 7 standard code criteria, that's attached, what I referred to earlier, as well as a finding there are circumstances relative to soils, land cover, ownership relations, or property restrictions of record that warrant the requested modification. So that's the section that says that if you are going to include these setbacks, that you want to have the opportunity for flexibility with that. And obviously I will stop at any time you like. On the issue of road access, we
Jack,
have
I have a question.
Sure.
If we're going to stop at any time.
Sure, Mr. Hall.
On the code that distinguishes new poultry house construction for house replacement, how did you determine allowing an expansion of footprint of 10%?
That had been taken from a code in a adjacent community that had gone through the public process, and that's certainly up for discussion. We just repeated it from there. I'm not sure how many additions there are going to be to poultry houses, but that would presumably provide for that. If it was an entirely new house, obviously they would have to comply with the new requirements. It also leaves open, as zoning does generally, what they call the act of God clause. If there's a fire or arson, they can replace that. And we also don't want to discourage people from improving their property. So even if you had a really old chicken house and you wanted to replace that, then that would be provided as well. In terms of road access, you currently are between introduction and adoption of a code that had to do with access to county roads. And obviously the council and executive will do as you see best about that issue when you can consider it at an upcoming meeting. But an alternative approach that was raised previously was that all chicken houses would be required to have accessing a county road. Again, if you're out on Snow Hill Road, it's a state road and they're going to deal with it. An access opening between 50 and 60 feet. We can put that in as a requirement tied into all new poultry house development.
And do away with the bill, if we wish.
Sure, you could do that. You could keep the bill. You could do away with the bill. If you're focusing on poultry houses, this would focus on poultry houses.
Mr. President, if I may, Mr. Lennox was referring to some of the standard provisions and requirements for special exception, and the language in those authorizes the process to require certain studies, which among those studies which are already listed in the zoning code provide for traffic. So that would also address the other legislative piece that you're talking about.
That's correct. If they're applying for anything that you include as a special exception.
So you're saying the only time that the 50, because you're referencing the 50, excuse me, the access opening between 50 and 60 feet?
No, that's required. That happens with all of them. The traffic studies Mr. Kramer referred to only kick in if they're applying for a special exception.
Okay.
This would say outright, due to the size of the trucks presumably, potential traffic, you need a larger radius at the opening. You know, it means the opening. The road itself isn't necessarily going to be 50 or 60 feet, the farm lane accessing the poultry houses, but the radius as it opens up to the county road.
And the purpose of that?
Turning movements so that the trucks can get on and off the county road without going onto adjacent property or unduly impacting the surface of the county road if they had to turn too sharply.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you use just a fixed number rather than an either-or number?
That was the number used by the council previously. You could go with either or. It just gives a little bit of flexibility in terms of site locations. Moving down into the actual standards themselves, and recalling that you have A1 Ag Rural District, and then the others which we have considered, which we refer to generally as designated growth areas, trying to make it more restrictive in the designated growth areas. So any standards that you have in the A1 as conceived apply to the other as well. So we start out talking about vegetated buffer around all active portions of the poultry operation. We've talked about that before. Active portions are defined up above. We try to reflect the setback requirements as discussed previously. And so in the A1 district, minimum 400-foot setback, any legally established residential dwelling not located on the farm property. And then we've added to that, since last time, school, church, nursing home, daycare center, mobile home park, subdivision of 10 or more homes. So that increase, and now also, if any of those have been approved already by the health department. So you're not having a race, as it were. So platted lots or another proposal which has gone far enough to have health department approval. And that would increase in those situations the setback from the third factor, which is now 200-foot setback from property lines. Previously, that had read 100 feet. Now it says 200 feet.
Jack, didn't read here whether you put in the distance from the center of a road.
We did not, because the 200 feet is measured from the right-of-way.
Okay, all right, okay, that's fine.
Right, the edge of the right-of-way is the property line.
Fine.
So the 400 feet is from a house in a subdivision?
A house, a church, a nursing home. Correct. So the standard 200 feet is doubled when you have a dwelling nearby or one of those other concerned parties.
And again, that is in the agricultural district, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Moving to the designated growth areas, and when we actually get to the point of drafting legislation, I know the council is aware there are individual zoning districts, so we would amend a chart. They would be called out separately, but here we're saying A1 versus everybody else. And realize everybody else includes commercial, industrial, residential. So I added the phrase since last time, where poultry houses may otherwise be permitted. That just implies that you're not opening up any new areas. But when you have standards in the designated growth areas, we have adhering to the minimum standards of A1. We talked about that before. And then this is the a new provision, minimum 500-foot setback. And again, I've struggled a little bit with, is it a measurement from the exhaust fans or is it a measurement from a house with an exhaust fan? So please take a look at that language. Minimum 500-foot setback for exhaust fans faced away from, and a minimum of 600-foot setback for exhaust fans facing toward any legally established residential dwelling, and this is similar language is up above. School, church, nursing home, daycare, mobile home, subdivision of 10 or more. You asked for an option for consideration, and that had to do with an additional review process in the designated growth area, and that again would be the special exception process. So the language provided for you now says that all base zoning districts, and I'll get into that if you like, but all base zoning districts other than A1 ag rural would require new poultry houses could only be established by special exception through the Board of Appeals. This would require consistency with the 7 standards that were referenced earlier. In looking at the code, and the reason that I attached for you the section directly out of the zoning code is that you start to see not only in paragraph C the 7 standards, but you also see something under D. And that's that the county has already anticipated in certain districts that there would be an additional requirement having to do with impact analysis at the expense of the proponent and potentially posting a surety guarantee. That's an option for the board. So one point of consideration is whether or not you wish to include poultry houses as one of those uses, which would provide additional analysis relative to those factors. As far as the vegetative buffer requirements, I did have a very good discussion with Mr. Passwaters, who's done a lot of the work in the area. You asked me to look at the issue of deciduous trees, and again, deciduous is leafy and seasonal rather than conifers, which are pine and stay green. That's an option if the property owner would like to do that, and it really is for beautification reasons, as well as the fact apparently the root system goes pretty deep and it holds up. But that's an option. It's more for appearance than it is for the actual buffer. So we have gone and changed the language, which I know you spent quite a bit of time on last time. we talked about the 3 rows and indicated that in the designated growth area, 5 rows would be appropriate, and in either case specifying that the furthest row is the evergreen. So that's how that's worded. It takes out the requirement for the deciduous, but except for the back row, that would be an option if the property owner chooses to do that. There is language in here that requires certain consistency with established, good practices. I did not require in here that the plan be put together by a particular professional, but it does refer to standards, and that is something that if it's worded this way, that we would administer internally. One last point that did not make it into your draft that I would suggest we consider. We've gotten some strong recommendations about the planting of certain grasses at the exhaust fans. And if we proceed and if you're supportive, the distance, I understand, is 20 feet. And we would make that a requirement of the landscaping plan as well, if you agree. Apparently, it's effective most effective at the tunnel areas, grows quickly, and apparently is effective as far as the industry is concerned. So that's the only point that's not in here that I would suggest you consider.
I would say we consider it and put it in, and then it's something that we can, when it comes down to the final reading of the bill, that would allow the Planning Commission to review that topic, as well as when it comes back to the council, we can re-review it, and if we want to amend it, we can amend it. I don't think it would hurt to put it in.
That's it for me, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Lennox. Questions from council? The difference on the 3 rows and 5 rows, any specific reason? I mean, do we think there's enough coverage with the 3, or as opposed to adding 2 more?
I think the basic feeling was that 5 was better than 3, and that we anticipate that in the designated growth areas, that if there are not homes in the vicinity now, there will be at some point in the future.
Okay. I was confused by section 3, plant material spacing within the rows shall be, and then there's 6 different choices. I wasn't sure how they all came together, Jack. Mm-hmm. Because you're talking about evergreens, and of course they weren't in any type of chronological order, so it didn't take much to confuse me on that.
I think it was just an indication, and I can't address the individual spacing. Again, that was one that carried over. Mm-hmm. It just indicated that different trees are planted at different separations. I'll look to Mr. Matt Holloway and others for any clarification on that issue.
I think these are just standards that come from most landscaping plans. Recommendations, best management recommendations for the growth of these different varieties.
Okay. It talks about having small deciduous trees and then large deciduous trees, and I didn't know if those are supposedly being, it's whether the suggestion is that both be used.
I think it's just if you plan on using these varieties,
Mm-hmm.
these are the different criteria that you should go by.
So it's more defining the spaces
That's right.
for the health, maybe probably for the health of the plant.
And they're taking into account the potential maximum size of it once it's full grown.
Canopy.
That's why.
Okay.
8 feet. So
Okay.
Canopy of the tree. What did you say is the requirement now, Jack? Did you?
Sorry, the requirement for what?
For
Joe.
what was the requirement now?
Right now, there's none.
None, but voluntarily they put them in. I know my neighbor's got 2 rows. He's got a row of the evergreens and a row of the, I can't pronounce that word, deciduous trees.
Got it.
That seems to do, I got it,
Yeah.
first time. That seems to do a pretty adequate job.
Some of the
just those
examples.
2 rows. So if you're going to 5, I think you're going to be very well buffered, depending on how they grow, if they grow.
One other comment that was made in discussions that I've had was that it's important that we put some type of a time frame on when the trees are planted, or any of the buffers are planted, because if you're not careful, you could have it in here and there would be no guidelines that would specifically say when. So I think we need to establish when these buffers are first planted.
Sure. The building permit would, remember when stormwater issues first came up, that the state wanted us to make sure the stormwater work was done. The building permit, the occupancy permit is conditioned on completion of the stormwater.
Right.
We could also make the building permit and the occupancy permit conditional upon the planting.
Good.
So, when a building permit is issued by the county,
Yes.
somebody's going to go out there to make sure everything's up to par before a certificate of occupancy is issued.
The building permit authorizes them to build, and then they build, and we go out and inspect to see that they've done what they're supposed to do. That includes stormwater, and you can have it include buffering,
And your lane, and your entrance to your lane.
and the entrance to the lane.
Correct.
Right.
I'm checking some questions, Jack.
So, Jack, what's the process? If, let's say we come to consensus today, where do we go from now in terms of enacting zoning laws, this zoning law?
My understanding is that the council intends to actually draft legislation that includes these standards and refer that for consideration by Planning and Zoning Commission, who would review and forward you a recommendation. You hold a public hearing here, and it takes effect in the standard time period.
So we have to draft legislation, and that legislation then gets sent to planning and zoning.
My understanding is that was your intent.
Next one, I'm curious, Mr. Strasburg's here. You know, obviously there's two parties here. You know, there's the council legislative, and then it has to be signed or vetoed by the executive. I'd prefer if we go through this process and come to a consensus that we don't send something that gets vetoed and you have to go through it again. What does the executive's office have any input on these matters? I mean, are we on the path that would be something that would be acceptable? Do you have anything you'd like to add to this so that we are all working together nicely?
I would just offer that that the executive and I have reviewed Mr. Lennox's draft this morning and are prepared to continue to move forward with discussions on the issues that he's raised, or the matters that he's raised.
Alrighty.
Jack, I know that the discussion today was to review the discussion draft that you had here. Over the last week, I was also going through the bill that was proposed. Have you had the opportunity to look at the bill that was initially proposed by the council?
I recall two bills,
Okay.
one much longer than the other.
Because there were some things where I thought that we would need to go through the actual bill, because eventually we will have to draft this as a bill before it goes to the Planning Commission. And I wanted to review that. And looking back, I don't know if the council is prepared to do that, or whether or not the council was just looking to review Mr. Lennox's discussion draft. I say that because there are some measures from that initial bill that obviously have to be reworked. Do we feel comfortable with that, or is this something you want to address in another work session?
I mean, if we come to consensus today, let's say, I trust that Jack could draft legislative language that reflects exactly what we have consensus on, and then we could review that, I guess, at our next meeting, and whatever the process is for referring it to planning and zoning, we could do that. I mean, I don't think that Jack's legislative drafting would, deviate from what we agreed to. So, I mean,
Okay.
that's
If the question, Mr. Cannon, is are there points that were in the previous legislation that are not included here that you would like to include, I can tell you that in reviewing it, I did take from that what I felt were the Wicomico County issues. And certainly there could be other things out there that I did not include that you may wish to, which was why we had the successive drafts,
Right.
to try to figure out if this was where we were. So I don't recall that there were other things in that draft that I have since heard from this council you wish was in there. I think we've covered it.
Yeah, maybe just the opposite, whereas in reviewing the prior bill that we had, there
Sure.
were references to traffic studies which really had not been implemented by the council. There were some posting of permits that were required, that were listed in that bill. And in discussing with you before, I know you had said that normally posting permits are only when there's a variance required.
Right.
And I just was,
Sure.
maybe trying to iron that out now, but these are certainly issues that we could discuss when the actual bill is prepared and brought back to the table, unless there's anything that the council wants to try to clear the air with now, so that when they are in the bill writing process, they're not throwing in a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily need to have in there.
Sure, at least personally, my intention was that the bill be drafted off of your discussion points.
That'll work. Okay. Okay. Any other comments from the council?
I've got a comment or a question for Jack.
Who's that mic, Joe? You're hard to hear.
Okay, not usually, but anyway, there's been some concern about people not knowing what's, what's going to happen in their neighborhood. I've done a little research, and I understand that if I'm right, the first thing a person does when they get ready to build a poultry house is they go to soil conservation. Is that correct? Is that their first step? I guess what is
That's
the
probably
steps
their
and when-
first public step.
Yeah. Okay.
There are probably chicken house proposals out there that are in the design phase that property owners are working with their engineer and trying to review. Keep in mind that it's a bit of a juggling act. There's building codes, there's stormwater, there's erosion sediment control, and then ultimately the CAFO. And they're working on that. Probably the first public exposure is for the erosion sediment control. That's the first time it shows up on a public list somewhere.
Okay. I know on the MDE site, there's a notice of intent. If you go to, when you find that tells everything every farm that's either here or coming. So at what point in time does that happen? What I'm trying to find out is when's as soon as somebody can find out that there's an operation coming to their neighborhood? I guess that's what I'm trying to, or is there a way they can find out?
I can just tell you, Mr. Holloway, that from my own standpoint, people will call up and say, what do you mean you don't know about this poultry
I
house?
understand, yeah.
And I will check with our Public Works Department and Stormwater. We'll check with Kevin Keenan and for erosion sediment control and find out what's on their list. That's the first time publicly. I'm not familiar with the notice of intent that you referred to.
Well, that's on the MDE website.
Is that regarding CAFO?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that could come
That could come much later.
much
So
later.
we had a situation happen on the east side. Apparently, somebody spread the news that there was a lot of chicken houses coming on the northwest corner of Walston Switch and Shavox Road. And I've researched everything I can, even going to the owner of the property and asking him if the property was going to be used for poultry houses or if it was for sale. It's not for sale, and it's not going to be used for poultry houses. And I'm just kind of wondering where this information came from or how it was divided. Soil Conservation didn't know anything about it. MDE didn't know anything about it. The tenant that takes care of the farm didn't know anything about it, and the owner of the property didn't know anything about it. So apparently there's some misinformation being spread around, and that needs to be, well, it doesn't need to happen really, but I wanted it to be clear how people could know and know what was true and what wasn't true. So you're saying,
They have had, folks have called us, and we can tell you if we've had plans submitted. We have offered in the past, because some folks will swear this is what they heard, and we'll call up Kevin, and Kevin's been very cooperative with us in terms of
so
sharing
that's
their
where they go
information.
the first time? Okay,
That's the first time publicly it would show up.
okay.
Joe, the NOI is also required if you're disturbing over an acre, I believe, through soil and erosion control.
Is that right?
So
Okay.
that'll be picked up at
That's a
Kevin's
Right,
office.
right, okay. All
May
right.
not be right away, though. That may be
Right.
later in the process.
Well, this misinformation got a lot of people upset. It's uncalled for, so.
Any other comments? I think what we're really looking to do here today is, of course, finalize what our responsibility as far as zoning regulations are concerned. We do know that there's been a lot of discussion over environmental issues, health issues, things of that nature. I know the idea of a moratorium has been suggested. I don't think the council has any inclination to impose a moratorium. If we were to do so, I think the houses that are currently being reviewed, it would do nothing more than probably delay that process. I know we have a lot of people that are here in reference to the Naylor Mill Road houses that have gone up recently. Not gone up, but been proposed. I personally don't have a specific answer for anyone, but I'm under the impression that these particular houses would not be stopped. I don't think that, from as far as where I have witnessed their progression in the pipeline, I don't think that the council would have the authority to stop these houses. I'm telling you this not because that's what I want to happen, but because I feel as if we are at that point where we're going to be restricted as far as what we can do as a government agency. I honestly feel that whatever we may attempt to do now could be challenged in court, and from my opinion, I think they would probably have a good case. I don't know. I'm trying to get confirmation, but I'm trying to just make everybody aware of where I feel from this side of the table where we are as a group, as a community. The only other thing I can add is that I know there are many people who are looking at health standards and environmental issues, and I do appreciate those concerns. I've addressed these with other staff members. What I've been told and what we're trying to confirm at this time is very important. We were trying to look at what we might be able to do in reference to safeguards, reference to the paleo channel. And it was pointed out to me that, okay, well, MDE will be, they'll be going back to the poultry houses every 5 years. So we thought, well, maybe we'll put restrictions so that every year maybe the county would go out and make sure that the water quality was safe. In doing so, I learned, and we're trying to get confirmation on this, but in addressing locally what we could do, I was informed that if there are any state regulations overseeing any specific industry, that the county does not have the authority to impose additional health regulations on that specific industry. That's very important to understand. MDE EPA and MDE are establishing guidelines, and they are setting down what they think are the principles necessary. And that for a local jurisdiction to get involved, they have to defer that to the state agency or the federal agency. I think that's something that this group needs to be aware of as well. Again, I think, with the forum that we had the other night, I felt that without being biased one way or another, I felt that there was some degree in comfort when the manager for the CAFOs did make the comment that there was zero discharge. I have been, excuse me. Again, these are not, I don't believe these are necessarily going to be local jurisdiction issues by state law. So I would suggest if you want to review that, please review that and let us know. I mean, we're trying to find out from our end if that's a valid point. So if he says zero discharge, I mean, people had told me that they were washing out the chicken houses with hoses and things like that. So I assumed they were washing out the chicken houses with hoses. That's not happening. So if you have other, if you have other information that you think is, contradicts that, I mean, we're open to hear that. I know we've got a lot of information here that's been afforded us before, but keep in mind that we do have state agencies and federal agencies that are involved in this process. No matter what my opinion might be, whether I agree with them or disagree with them, they are still the ones, as I understand it to be, they are the ones that are in control of what is dictated to the local jurisdictions. So,
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Ernie.
I mean, I was in the meeting, and one question was raised. If something happened to one of the sheds, manure sheds, if it spilled over the paleo channel, what was the likelihood of it contaminating the paleo channel, and how much would it? No one on that panel could answer that question.
Right.
And then the other question was raised was with the nitrous. Someone asked what was the difference between a residential sewer system and a chicken house. Which one puts out the most nitrous? Again, no one on that panel can answer this. And these are the experts, the MDE, but they couldn't answer those questions.
Right, and I understand that. And again, as I said before, I'm not biased one way or the other. What I'm trying to do is follow what the law is. And the environmental issues, whether it's exhaust from the fans, whether it's a chicken house that blows up or whatever might happen, those are under the jurisdiction of the state of Maryland, the Maryland Department of the Environment, the Maryland Department of Agriculture, however that might be established. Now, I think, we're in charge of building permits and some things of that nature. It's our responsibility to make sure that the manure shed or that poultry house is built according to standards, because that is what the local jurisdiction's responsibility is. I would imagine that if there was a gas station where, it has happened before, where a car goes into a gas station, hits the tank, and everything gets, explodes. Well, you have a problem. But again, there are agencies out there that are their responsibility is to address those concerns. But I felt it was necessary at least to let the audience know, because we're getting a lot of information. There's a lot of concerned people here, and we don't turn a deaf ear to them. But we try to make sure that before we make any statements, we know exactly what our position is. We know exactly what our responsibilities are and what our limitations might be. So I wanted to make you aware of those two issues as far as where we are in the pipeline with the houses that have already been proposed, and where we are on restricting health and environmental issues from a local jurisdiction. Again, as it was explained to me, if there was a tattoo parlor and there was some type of restrictions that the council wanted to impose, we could do it, because there are no state regulations on the tattoo parlor. But when you're talking about the poultry industry and poultry houses, there are regulations already established by state law. So I just want to make sure everyone was clear with that. I know you certainly aren't going to like that, but that's where we are right now. And again, I encourage you, if you find any other points of interest that we need to know in reference to that specifically, please let us know.
Jack, I had a conversation with a gentleman from Tyson, and he explained to me, he said, anybody can buy a farm and hire a consultant, and they can draw 30 chicken houses on a property, or 15, or 13, or 10, as many as will fit, before they ever get involved with soil conservation. And, of course, they might be wasting money when they do it. But the reason they do that sometimes is that the consultant, the architect, Matt, I guess, what are they called? Is it consultant? Yes. Is that what they call them? Okay. They do that because they're going to charge them so much money to do whatever they're going to do anyway, so they tell them the most they could do. Now, his statement to me, there was never any intention of putting 13 chicken houses on that farm on the west side. Now, I know there's not much difference when people think 13 and 10, and they're only going to put 10 on if they could fit in a certain way. So they can go out and hire a consultant and do their drawings and basically get ready to do what they want to do on that property before they ever go to soil conservation. Correct?
They can do that, and obviously we've seen that very prominently in the past on certain residential dwelling applications. Someone will come in with the most number of homes that they perceive they could possibly get, and then start to work with the health department on what areas perk and other considerations. So it's not uncommon in development for a property owner to go to the highest number and then come back.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So the permit for the chicken house on Northwest Road has been issued?
It has not.
No.
What comes into play, Ernie, is the level, the degree of processes that the owners have gone through as to whether or not they could justify in the court of law as to whether or not they feel that they have followed obligations that were imposed upon them by any agency, state agency, local jurisdiction, and whether or not a court would decide yes or no, whether or not they have followed through with a strong enough commitment that would by law allow them to keep, to finish the project, period.
What processes have they been through?
Mr. Lennox?
Sure. Mr. Davison, Northwest Road, they went through erosion and sediment control. They had stormwater approval. They submitted for a building permit application. We required, in order to address the issue that Mr. Joe Holloway just raised, we required a sign-off from the integrator. The integrator saw the plans, said, this isn't what I want to build, and the applicant is gone back to redesign. My understanding is that they will resubmit stormwater, resubmit erosion sediment control, and then apply for a building permit with the reduced number. That's what we're expecting. They have not submitted those plans.
And in understanding, I'm not advocating for them. All I'm saying is that where it is in the line right now, I have heard nothing positive from my end of it that says that, my perspective, that this can be stopped. I could be wrong. I don't hope I'm wrong. I don't hope I'm right. I'm just trying to give you an idea of where I think we are in that process.
Mr. Lennox, is it my understanding that it was originally 13 houses in the project, and then they, for some reason, they broke it down to 2 5 chicken house projects by separate family members? Is that the case, and why? And would they have to have 2 separate erosion control plans?
I think what's happening is that, I can't say about the ownership, but what we have found out that when you go through erosion sediment control, there's an amount of land, and I don't know the number, that can be disturbed at any one time. So in order to meet those requirements, you design it so that if you build half of the project, it can stand on its own, and then you can build the second half of it. That's just a logistical question, though, as far as the sequencing of construction goes. In terms of Northwest Road, the 13, we have been advised by the integrator, will be 10, and the property owner has indicated that they would be redesigning to 5 and 5. So they're further from the residential area to the west, to the northwest.
Okay.
We have not seen those plans yet.
Any other questions? The second item on the agenda is the legislative bill, 2016-03. Yes.
Mr. Kent, I mean,
Yes.
are we, where are we in the process of finalizing this legislation?
Mr. Lennox, I was under the impression that you were going to try to work with the law department to fashion a bill based on the draft that we had in front of us. Am I correct?
Mr. Cantor, my understanding from the administration is that I will assist. However, I am not the lead drafter of the bill.
I wouldn't expect you to be.
Sure.
I would expect that to be a legal issue.
That is also, we will continue to work with the council and your designee.
With a bill based on the guidelines.
Sure.
that you
Oh,
presented
absolutely.
today.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, what about the options for consideration, then? That has not been agreed to.
Right.
So that's, all right.
Okay.
Okay.
You-
Just making sure, because.
Would you like
When you
those?
say the option for, what are you referencing?
Options for
Mark?
consideration on second page there, so. I mean,
Well, let's, no, I thought we were done with discussion, but if there's things you want to discuss, reference to that.
no, I'm trying to clarify exactly what we've agreed to. So that's basically everything above options for consideration.
Well, I mean, you do bring up a very good point, but I'm waiting for input so that we know where to continue here, okay? I asked for questions and there were none left.
I'm good to move on.
Okay.
Does
Special
anybody
exception in the growth
want to
areas.
discuss the option of special exceptions in the designated growth area? I mean, and Mark makes a very good point.
That's the open point.
Excuse me?
I would say that that's the critical open point right
I
now.
do think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I agree. I know that Jack has said before that by asking for special exception, it would be it would make it probably impractical to even consider putting a poultry house in the designated growth area. In reviewing what I saw as far as the requirements, I thought some of them were very vague, and I also thought that the way it was structured, there was a lot left open to interpretation. But again, I'd be very interested in council input as far as what they'd like to see.
We might have a situation where there's already poultry houses in the that area, and somebody wants to add another one, or you also have a situation where one could burn down, so they would still have to go through the special exception, correct?
If you're going to add to the number,
Yeah.
it would be special exception. If you're just replacing, it would not.
It's grandfathered.
Yeah, okay. Unless they go over the 10%. Yeah.
The nature, by the way, of a special exception is generally saying that, it says that generally speaking, the use is acceptable in the zone, subject to these additional considerations, and the biggest one being the yellow sign that goes out, the public that gets to speak, that presents factors for consideration. That's the biggest difference.
There were also notations made on the number 2 in reference to the vegetation buffer shall be installed as follows. There was specific reference to number 2 about buffers should be installed. Did you see that? You have that?
I recall the discussion.
Okay.
I was viewing that frankly as just a condition that we would normally attach to a building permit, like any requirement. If the building permit is issued and it's done in accordance with a driveway opening, stormwater, planting requirements, that's a condition. Like it would be if you were a grocery store.
In references on number 2, it referenced twice the Delmarva poultry industry, such as buffers should be installed in accord with best management practices and to ensure growth of material survival, suitable resources of the Delmarva poultry industry, vegetative buffer coordinator. I was curious as to why that was included in there, because I wouldn't want our law to be based on an industry standard.
If you don't wish to have reference to any particular other agency, it's a reference to best practices. It's just best management practices.
Well, wouldn't those best management practices be included within the bill?
It would be difficult without including a landscape detail.
That's what I was talking to Councilman Holloway about before. I think maybe the bill should reference a particular document which the county itself could prepare, and the bill would reference that.
We can do that.
Some minimum standard.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure,
Yes.
we can reference, there are examples where, you have legislation, and then following up from that is the administration of those, and you can refer to that.
And that way, anytime something changes, it doesn't have to go back and
Right.
be amended by a legislative bill.
Right.
Okay.
But those standards should be established with your department,
Yes, sir.
not
That's fine.
any outside source.
Yeah, if you would be deferring that then basically to the administrative function that the
Yes.
county shall establish policies.
Okay.
Gotcha.
I don't know if this was brought up in this conversation. If it was, I missed it. This doesn't just apply to Salisbury, the designated growth area. It applies to all the incorporated cities, towns, right?
And all of the rural villages.
And
Right,
rural
those are
villages.
considered growth areas.
Yeah. That's a concern.
There's a whole list of zoning classifications that you should probably be made aware of in terms of a proposed special exception clause or language, because there are a number of zoning classifications that would be impacted.
Again, in the map that you've looked at in different contexts perhaps, it's any area that's in a particular color. Any area in white is agriculture. So you protect Hebron the same way you would protect Salisbury.
If we opted to do the special exception
Yes, sir.
requirement.
Right.
Right, exactly.
For the
I was-
desert.
I was
Sure,
getting about that.
sure, and you would do Parsonsburg as you would do Pittsville, even though Parsonsburg's a rural area, a village.
Not incorporated.
And how
Sure.
does council feel about that
Well,
requirement?
I'm sitting here trying to count in my head how many poultry houses there are around Willards, Pittsville, and Parsonsburg, and how they wouldn't be there if we had this probably. It's going to really restrict, because that's more of a rural area. I mean, they're not built out quite like Salisbury is. You see what I'm saying? They go from basically their town center, their property lines, and then it turns rural automatically from there.
But it's not, Mr. Holloway, it's not in the incorporated areas, though? And it's that difficulty that we have where some folks will swear they live in Salisbury and they don't, but it just happens to have a mailing address.
Right.
So areas that are considered Parsonsburg, as you well know, are not in the designated village or within the incorporated municipality of Pittsville
Right, I
or
understand that.
Willards.
But they do all have growth
Sure.
areas around them, correct?
They do have growth areas, which means they do. You're right. Yes, they do.
Would council like me to get the zoning map? I have a large scale.
I can get one.
Have you got it?
Yep.
I mean, I'm just sitting here trying to think, one of the largest farmers we have on the east side is between Pittsville and Willards, and if he decided,
It would be by special exception.
it would be only by special exception, and basically, he doesn't have any neighbors that would, I don't think many that would complain, so it would,
I suspect the family will weigh in on this
Yeah.
discussion.
yeah. I have
Jack,
concerns
can you
about that.
walk through special exception, who would have standing? Because I think that may help council as
To
well.
oppose it.
Right. Just
Not to
broadly.
oversimplify, but it's abutters. It's property, adjacent property owners. It's not someone from the other side of the county. It's not someone from a different county. It's not just an interest, someone who considers themselves to have interest in it. Its legal standing is defined. I'll defer to our county attorney for further guidance, but it's pretty specific to those in the immediate area.
I've got a mounted copy that'll help.
We have it, Council, you have this also in your files, too.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and-
yeah, we have the
That's
zoning
not
map.
it.
No.
That's not what you want.
That's the addition.
No, that's the ditch.
That's not what he wants. That's not what he's looking for.
You should have it in your, everyone should have it here. We have the zoning map here.
That's it.
That was supplied to us. You also have it in electronic file. If you want to pull it up, you have an electronic file as well. And we also have it in 4x8s
Yes, we did.
Here it is.
individually.
The zoning map is the best to refer to. That would show what the county considers the growth area to be, the designated growth area around each of the towns and villages.
So Jack, how could we alleviate that, other than special exception, if we wanted to?
This is the map.
Well, Joe, I think what we suggested prior to this is different standards for the designated growth area as opposed to the ag district.
Where do you have this?
Follow me?
Do you have the individual map? Got it? Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Put this one up so the audience.
Did you recognize, did you understand that?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think I do, anyway.
Mr. President,
Yes.
for those who are interested, the zoning map is also online
Okay.
for anyone who wants to look at it.
Does the council need any further clarification as far as the specifics of the criteria of the special exception? It is part of what's been supplied to us by Mr. Lennox.
How do we feel then? Do we want this included?
I think that what's been done with the two requirements in the prior
The distinguishing between the two?
distinguishing, I think it's very important that we distinguish between the restrictions in the ag district and the designated growth area, and I think that that's sufficient. But that's just one opinion. We do need some type of
I agree.
consensus. John, yeah, Mark,
I agree.
Mark,
Leave it how it is.
Matt, Larry, what do you think? Is that a yes, Larry?
Yes.
Thank you. Ernie? Yes. Okay, Joe?
I'm okay with it, but I think we need to still need to look at these areas.
Okay.
I think we'll address that.
So it doesn't require a special?
Right now, we're not, right now, we want to go with the restrictions that you've issued
Gotcha.
prior to
I
this
think we need to hear
recommendation.
from the people in those areas.
But you have enough to put that together, Jack, right? Not you, I said.
Would
but
you, I
think.
understand, would you like, we're not including that in your draft.
Right.
Fine, and then if through the public hearing process, folks suggested it be, then you'll get that input.
Could amend it.
Okay.
It's a good start. Okay. Mr. Kilmer, are you comfortable with everything?
I just want to make sure that.
I'm glad you did.
So we can get this process, so we're not spinning our wheels anymore.
No, I agree.
So, right.
I agree. It's a good point. Is it okay with council if we move on then to the legislative bill 2016-03? This is referencing what we had initiated as far as traffic studies were being required. Of course, this hasn't gone to public hearing yet. The only thing that we have done is introduce it. So we brought it back up to the table that some of the members of the council had concerns. Maybe they wanted to be more specific or just amended in period. So I'm leaving it open to the floor for anybody that wants to discuss the specific bill.
Well, I'll start. I think we've addressed it in the poultry legislation, and I think we should go ahead and pull that bill. The county executive, I think, feels the same. Wayne, am I correct? County executive office feels the same way. That's addressed there. That
We think if we address it within the zoning legislation, that it's
Right.
been properly addressed.
okay. I'm in favor of pulling it. So anyway.
Any other input from council members?
I concur with Mr. Holloway. Joe Holloway.
All right,
Keep it
so,
all the way straight.
I mean, to clarify, this was, this would give more power to the executive's office, the executive branch to do road issues, as was discussed a couple weeks ago. But with the changes in terms of the driveway and access to county roads, that should take care of, in your opinion, the issues with traffic. I mean, with
Particularly
the
this,
wear and
particularly the
tear.
safety issues,
The safety issue.
right. And that was the primary issue.
All right. Not okay. All right.
What about the deterioration of the road?
Well, if we're going to go in that direction, then we would have to then consider applying those standards to virtually any use that accesses a county road. The primary concern when we first addressed this issue was, in particular, the site that we were discussing on Naylor Mill and West Road, is that those turning radiuses are very, very important in terms of keeping trucks out of opposing lane traffic and navigating those turns onto the property in a safe manner. If we embed that standard, that minimum standard, in our zoning legislation, we believe that would address that concern across the county.
They still didn't address the deterioration of the road. They're just saying going in and out of the property.
Can I address that?
Go ahead, Joe.
Because when they did the dump site, I mean, they really tore that road up. And just last year, they finally repaved it.
Well, the problem I see, Ernie, is the poker companies like yourself
Joe.
with the buses pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in road tax every year, and for the state, I never did get the figure because well, it's hard probably to get all the figures together. Everybody pays taxes on their roads, so doing a study and asking somebody to pave a road from one end to the other because they're going to use it's a little unfair because they are paying road taxes. Now, unfortunately, the state in the past 7 years has taken our roads money away from us. So that's why our roads are deteriorating, because we're not getting money from the state. I mean, it's up to us to keep our roads up. Everybody sitting at this table and in the audience pays road taxes. The poultry companies, the bus drivers, people that use the roads commercially pay a lot more because they're using a lot more fuel. Mr. Holloway's, I'm sure he can relate to how much fuel tax those trucks pay. So I can't see where we can put that cost on the poultry companies or any other company or business, Walmart or anybody else that's going to use our county roads. So
Our primary concern was safety.
yeah, safety of getting in and out of the road and the initial impact.
You mentioned a poultry company pays road taxes. But what about that individual farmer on that road?
When any tagged vehicle, he pays road tax too,
Registration fees? Yeah.
like you do with your buses.
Any other comments? All right. In reference to the legislative bill, what's council feel? I mean, do you want to move this forward? Do you think that what the initial concerns might have been addressed in the legislation we're considering, the broader legislation in reference to the poultry houses as a whole? Or do you feel that this separate bill is still necessary to move forward?
I make a motion, we remove the bill.
Mr. President,
Yes.
this is a work session.
I
You
understand.
have the purposes to discussion, reach consensus. If you reach consensus, it should be an item on the agenda for the April 5th meeting for you to take formal action.
Understand. Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Once again,
Mr. Holloway's put in the form of a motion, but which is fine. But I think what we can do is just do it by consensus,
That's
just
fine.
the same,
Yeah.
Joe. It's,
Want to move it along?
understand.
once again, I'm in agreement with Mr. Joe Holloway for withdrawing this against this motion.
Okay. Can do that.
Yeah, I mean.
Larry? Put it on the agenda. Ernie?
On the agenda.
All right, we'll move forward with it on the agenda. That'd be great. If you can make a note, make sure we have that done. Any other questions or comments from council members? No, seeing none. All right. With that being said, entertain motion to adjourn. Second? Meeting is adjourned.
Well,
Yeah, but I think you don't know what they. Okay, I sent both of these pages. But you got